whereas obstructive disorders are the ones in which airways are obstructed, like bronchial asthma, COPD, where expiration is obstructed. So like I mentioned in the last class, the hallmark for differentiation of obstructive and restrictive diseases is the FEV1 by FVC ratio, right? So I hope you all remember what is FEV1, what is FVC. FVC is the forced vital capacity, right? FEV1 is forced expiratory volume in the first second. So I had already shown you the graph as well in the last class, this one, right? So due to obstruction in expiration, in case of obstructive lung disease, the FEV1 is greatly reduced, which causes a reduction in this ratio. So diagnosis of obstructive lung disease is done when this ratio is lesser than 70% or 0.7. Okay, so if your FEV1 by FVC ratio is less than 70%, you are diagnosed with obstructive lung disease. Whereas in case of restrictive lung disease, what happens is this ratio is normal. Okay, and some differences in obstructive and restrictive lung diseases I'd like to mention is that in case of obstructive lung disease, what happens is the total lung capacity, the functional residual capacity, these parameters are also in. Okay, so I'm sure you'll learn more about this in pathology, air trapping, okay, and destruction tissue, etc. There is a lot of air that is trapped inside your lung. That is why the total lung capacity, the residual volume, functional residual capacity, these parameters are increased. Okay, and also the hall. Now these things you have to read by yourself. Okay, these are just some definitions, and I hope you go through them in these slides. So the minute ventilation or pulmonary ventilation, maximum breathing capacity, pulmonary reserve. I'm going to be uploading slides, so please go through them. And one thing that I would you to consider. So the first one is we have measured some volumes and capacities from spirometer, right? But there are some volumes that cannot be measured by spirometer. Okay, so you have understood the procedure now. So you have to know what volumes and capacities cannot be measured by spirometer and what methods or instruments can you use to measure. Okay, so these questions are important for your Viva point of view. You are usually asked. So I want you to find out the answers to these questions, okay? And don't just write the name of the method, also write the procedure. Okay, so find out what volumes cannot be measured by spirometer and also find out what can you do to measure these volumes. So I'll give you 1 week and I hope you submit the answers by Tuesday. All of you should submit the answer by Tuesday. Okay. So this is it for the lung volumes and capacities. Now let me start with oxygen transport. Okay, so let us go to transport of gases. Today we're going to be talking about oxygen. So what are our objectives for today's lecture? What should we know? You should know about the oxygen uptake by pulmonary capillary blood, how it happens. Okay. Then how is this oxygen transported to different tissues of your body? Then the role of hemoglobin, which is the most important in oxygen transport. Also about something known as oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve and all the factors that affect this curve. There's something known as Bohr effect as well, which I'll be talking about. And what is the physiological significance of this oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve? These things you have to learn. So let us begin. Okay, so you have already studied about gas exchange, right? You know how gaseous exchange takes place, the alveolar gas and the pulmonary capillary, right? You know about the respiratory membrane and how diffusion takes place and all of that. Now, you also have to know how this oxygen that is exchanged via the respiratory membrane is transported to the whole of your body. How is it taken to different cells and tissues of the body? Okay, so let us start from the lungs. So all of you must be aware that the gaseous, the alveolar oxygen partial pressure is 104 millimeter of mercury, approximately 104 millimeter of mercury. Okay, and the pulmonary capillary at the venous end, what is the partial pressure of oxygen? It is 104 millimeter of mercury, but first we have to consider arterial end. So what happens? The oxygen is taken up by the different tissues of your body, and when it re-enters the right heart and then it goes to the pulmonary capillaries at the arterial end, the partial pressure of oxygen is around 40 millimeter of, right? So the pulmonary capillary at its arterial end averages only 40 millimeter of mercury because a large amount of oxygen was from this blood while it passed through the peripheral. Okay, so the difference here you can see the oxygen in the alveolus, partial pressure of oxygen in the alveolus amounted to about 104 millimeter of mercury. Whereas in case of pulmonary capillary arterial end, the pressure is only about 40 millimeter of mercury. And all of you must be knowing that gas, it travels from the higher partial pressure to lower partial pressure, right? So the pressure difference over here is 64 millimeter of mercury. So it passes along its gradient, pressure gradient, right? And reaches the venous end. Now it's the partial pressure of oxygen at the pulmonary venous end, it comes to be about 104 millimeter of mercury. Okay, all of you know that diffusion of oxygen is taking place along the pressure gradient, right? So you can see in this graph as well. So firstly, at the arterial end, the partial pressure of oxygen was 40 millimeter of mercury. Then it rapidly rose and it became about 104 millimeter of mercury. Okay, and this rapid increase in the partial pressure of oxygen happens very quickly. Okay, so as the blood passes through 1/3 of the pulmonary capillary, the partial pressure reaches almost about 104 millimeter of mercury. Okay, so this is how oxygen travels from the alveolus to the pulmonary capillary blood along the pressure gradient with a pressure difference of around 64 millimeter of mercury. So this is what this graph is showing you. Now about 98% of blood that enters the left atrium from the lungs has just passed through the alveolar capillaries and it has become oxygenated up to a partial pressure of about 104 millimeter of mercury. Now what happens is another 2% of blood, it passes from the aorta through bronchial circulation. So what is this bronchial circulation? It is a circulation which mainly supplies the deep tissues of the lungs. Okay, so lungs also need some blood supply, right? And this blood supply is provided by bronchial circulation. The deep tissues of the lungs, the pleura, etc. Okay, they are supplied by bronchial circulation. And what happens is this bronchial circulation, it bypasses the gas exchange apparatus. That means it does not go through the pulmonary capillaries where gaseous exchange takes place. Okay, that is why it cannot get oxygenated. And also the blood from coronary circulation. So what is this coronary circulation? It is the circulation that supplies the heart. Okay, this circulation also bypasses the gas exchange apparatus. What is this gas exchange apparatus? It is the alveoli and the pulmonary capillaries. It does not go through there. Okay, it bypasses this apparatus. And this is known as shunt flow. This is very important. Okay, so some amount of blood does not pass through the gas exchange apparatus and it cannot get oxygenated. This blood is known as shunt flow. And what does it consist of? It consists of the bronchial circulation and coronary circulation, blood from the coronary circulation, right? And because this blood cannot get oxygenated, it does not get oxygenated, what happens is it goes and mixes directly with the oxygenated blood. Okay, this is known as venous admixture of blood. So I talked about how oxygenation was taking place, how oxygen was moving along its pressure gradient, right? But this shunted blood or the venous admixture does not go through that process, and it directly goes and mixes with the oxygenated blood. That is why it brings down the partial pressure of oxygen in the oxygenated blood. So in the aorta, the partial pressure of oxygen falls to about 95 millimeter of mercury. Okay, 95 to 97 millimeter of mercury actually. Okay, so I hope you understand the concept of venous admixture and shunt blood. This is very important, okay? So in this graph also you can see the same thing that I talked about. So here you can see the partial pressure of oxygen at the systemic venous blood is 40 millimeter of mercury, right? Then it passes through the pulmonary capillaries, and after it passes through the pulmonary capillaries, the partial pressure of oxygen increases rapidly, okay, and it comes to be about 104 millimeter of mercury. But this oxygenated blood also mixes with some shunt blood, which comes from bronchial circulation and from coronary circulation. And this causes a drop in partial pressure of oxygen, and it becomes about 95 to 97 millimeter of mercury. Okay, and that is the systemic arterial partial pressure of oxygen. And finally, again, when it reaches the systemic capillaries, the tissues take up oxygen, right? The cells and tissues of our body, they take up oxygen, and the partial pressure of oxygen reduces. And again, in the systemic venous blood, it is 40 millimeter of mercury. Okay, I hope this is clear. Now talking about oxygen transport to tissues. So up to now we have talked about the lungs, right? How this oxygen transports from the alveolus to the pulmonary capillaries. Now from the pulmonary capillaries it has to go through, from the this left heart, it again goes to the different tissues of the body, right? So from aorta it goes to different arteries and then arterioles and capillaries, right? And it has to be transported to different tissues of the body. So how does that happen? Okay, so when arterial blood reaches the peripheral tissues, its partial pressure in capillaries is still 95 millimeter of mercury. So partial pressure of oxygen in the arterial end of capillary is about 95 millimeter of mercury. You understand how, right? But what happens is, now in the interstitial fluid, I hope you know what interstitial fluid is, right? It is the fluid that is present between the cells. Okay, so the partial pressure of oxygen in the interstitial fluid is about 40 millimeter of mercury. Okay, so again, there is a great pressure difference. So oxygen can easily be transported from the arterial end to the interstitial fluid. Okay, and then when it reaches the venous end, again, its partial pressure of oxygen is 40 millimeter of mercury. Okay, and from the interstitial space, again, interstitial fluid, again, the oxygen travels to the cells and tissues as well, right? So in the cells, the partial pressure of oxygen, it actually ranges from 5 millimeter of mercury to 40 millimeter of mercury, averaging about 23 millimeter of mercury. So again, there is a pressure difference. So oxygen travels along its gradient, it diffuses, and it also reaches the cells. Okay. Actually, the cells, they only require 1 to 3 millimeter of mercury partial pressure of oxygen. So there is a great safety factor as well. Okay, this 23 millimeter of mercury is much more than that is required. So anyway, this is how oxygen is transported to different tissues of our body. So first, we talked about how it is transported from the lungs, right? And then how it reaches into the tissues. So this is very simple. I hope all of this is clear to you. Now the most important part, what is the role of hemoglobin in transport of oxygen? Okay, hemoglobin, oxygen mainly is transported by binding to hemoglobin. Very little amount is transported in dissolved form. About 97% of oxygen is transported in chemical combination with hemoglobin. So hemoglobin, as you all must be knowing, it is present in red blood cells, right? And this 3%, remaining 3%, it is transported in dissolved state. Okay, so under normal conditions, oxygen is carried to the tissues almost entirely by hemoglobin. Okay, so the structure of hemoglobin, talking a little bit about structure of hemoglobin, it is a protein which is made up of 4 subunits. Okay, and each of these subunits contains a heme moiety, which is attached to polypeptide chain. And in normal adults, in normal adult hemoglobin, usually there is 2 alpha and 2 beta chains. Also, it contains 1 atom of ferrous ion. Okay, each of these. So, one hemoglobin molecule contains 4 ferrous ion atoms, and each of these can bind 1 oxygen molecule. So, one molecule of hemoglobin can bind 4 molecules of oxygen. Okay, and the iron always stays in the ferrous state. Oxygenation reaction takes place and not oxidation. It is not reduced. Okay, so this is a little bit about structure of oxygen. This is, hemoglobin. This is important to understand the reaction between hemoglobin and oxygen. Okay, so hemoglobin first, it contains 4 deoxyhemoglobin units. Okay, so it can be represented as Hb4, and it actually reacts with 4 molecules of oxygen. So like I said, one hemoglobin can bind 4 molecules of oxygen. So in the end, this is what you get, Hb4O8. Okay, and this reaction is very rapid, which requires less than 0.01 second. Right. One more important thing that you have to remember is that this deoxyhemoglobin, in this deoxyhemoglobin, the globin units are tightly bound, and this has very less affinity for oxygen molecules. So when it is not oxidized at all, that means deoxyhemoglobin, in deoxyhemoglobin, there is less affinity for oxygen, because the globin units are tightly bound in TENS or T configuration. Right, but as soon as one oxygen is bound, the bonds are loosened and it reaches a relaxed configuration. So when this, see, Hb4 plus O2, in this Hb4 state, the globin units are tightly bound in TENS configuration, and it has very less affinity towards oxygen. But as soon as one molecule of oxygen binds to this, then the bonds are loosened and it reaches a relaxed configuration. Okay, and now more and more oxygen molecules can continue to bind with this oxygenated hemoglobin. Okay, so this exposes more oxygen binding sites and it increases the oxygen affinity up to 500 times. Okay, now a reaction between hemoglobin and oxygen, what you have to know is that when the partial pressure of oxygen is high, for example in pulmonary capillaries, oxygen binds with hemoglobin. So this must be simple to understand, right? Because there is great partial pressure of oxygen in pulmonary capillaries. Okay, that is why more and more hemoglobin can bind with oxygen. And like I said, after one molecule of oxygen binds, the bonds get loosened and more oxygen can bind. Okay, so when the partial pressure of oxygen is high in pulmonary capillaries, oxygen continuously binds with hemoglobin. But when partial pressure is low, for example in tissue capillaries, this oxygen is released from hemoglobin. Okay, so less partial pressure of oxygen, then oxygen is released from hemoglobin. More partial pressure of oxygen, for example, in pulmonary capillaries, then oxygen is bound to hemoglobin. And this is the basis of almost all oxygen transport from lungs to tissues. Okay. Now, one of the most important things that you have to learn in today's class is this curve, okay, oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. So what is this? So here it is the relationship between partial pressure of oxygen in blood, which is expressed in millimeter of mercury, you can see in the x-axis, with the hemoglobin saturation. That means oxygen saturation with hemoglobin. So how much of hemoglobin is saturated with oxygen? So this is shown in the y-axis, right? And this one over here is volumes. That means how much, what percentage of oxygen is present. Or this, see 0.246, you can see over here, this is ml in 100 ml. So here this is 20 ml in each 100 ml of blood. So this represents the volume. Okay, and see, this curve is sigmoid shaped. This is known as a sigmoid shaped curve. Okay, and what you can observe over here is that, see, here, as you have already studied, the partial pressure of oxygen in case of the arterial blood, right? As soon as it comes from the lungs, the oxygenated blood leaving the lungs, it is about 95 to 97 millimeter of mercury, right? So the partial pressure of oxygen, it comes to be 95 to 97 millimeter of mercury as soon as blood leaves the lung, right? So in this case, the hemoglobin saturation is very high, about 95%. Okay, and as the partial pressure drops, so the blood is now coming from the arteries and it is going to different parts of your bodies, and oxygen is continuously being taken up from the tissues, right? So when that happens, the partial pressure of oxygen continues to drop, right? And even when the partial pressure of oxygen drops to about 40 millimeter of mercury, so now you know that in venous blood, the partial pressure of oxygen is about 40 millimeter of mercury, right? So even in this state, the hemoglobin saturation drops only to about 70 to 75%. It does not drop further than that in normal resting condition. Okay, so usually our body operates in this area of the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. And only during strenuous exercise or some strenuous physical activity or some other condition, only then this area of the curve comes into play. So see, in the as soon as the oxygenated blood is leaving the lungs, you know that the partial pressure is about 95 millimeter of mercury, partial pressure of oxygen. Okay, at that point, the hemoglobin saturation with oxygen is about 95 to 97%. Right, and as the oxygen is taken up by different tissues of the body, it travels through capillaries, tissue capillaries, etc., then oxygen is continuously taken up and the partial pressure of oxygen continues to drop, but the oxygen saturation with hemoglobin, it only drops to about 70 to 75%. Okay, and when the pressure drops below 40 millimeter of mercury, only when partial pressure of oxygen drops below 40 millimeter of mercury is there a steep decrease in the oxygen saturation of hemoglobin. Okay, right, so it usually operates between almost 100% to 75% of saturation, right? Almost 195 to 100% and 70 to 75%. This is where the curve is operating normally. And also talking about volume. Okay, so when about 100% of hemoglobin is saturated with oxygen, in this case, 20 ml of oxygen is carried per 100 ml of, okay, 15 to 20 milliliter. And you can see over here, when the tissues take up more and more oxygen and the partial pressure continues to drop and it reaches to about 40 millimeter of mercury, the oxygen saturation of hemoglobin reaches about 70 to 75%. Then the volume that is present is 15 milliliter. 15 milliliter of oxygen is carried by 100 milliliter of blood in this case. Okay, so from this you can deduce that the oxygen that is taken up by the tissues up to this point is about 5 milliliter. Okay, because 20 milliliter was present when almost 100% of hemoglobin was saturated with oxygen, when the blood was leaving the lungs. And when this blood was distributed throughout the body, okay, and different tissues take up oxygen, resulting in reduction in the partial pressure of oxygen to about 40 millimeter of mercury, then there is 15 milliliter of oxygen available per 100 milliliter of blood. So from this 20 minus 15, you can deduce that about 5 milliliter of oxygen is taken up by the tissues. Okay, so what happens per minute? I hope you know what is cardiac output. Right, cardiac output is the output of the heart per minute, right? So it is around 5 liters or 5,000 milliliters. Now per minute, how much oxygen is carried by hemoglobin in the blood? So in 100 ml, 5 ml of blood was carried, taken up by the tissues, right? So in 5,000 milliliters, about 250 milliliter of oxygen is taken up by the tissues. So that is the resting oxygen consumption. Okay, and it's mostly by hemoglobin and only some of it is in dissolved form. So maybe this is a little bit complicated for you. Let me explain this curve to you once more. Okay, so what is this oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve? It demonstrates a progressive increase in the percentage of hemoglobin that is bound with oxygen as the blood partial pressure of oxygen increases, and this is known as percent saturation of hemoglobin. Okay, and because the blood leaving the lungs and entering systemic arteries usually has a partial pressure of about 95 millimeter of mercury, you can see that the usual oxygen saturation of systemic arterial blood, it averages to about 9%. Okay, and in normal venous blood, which has a partial pressure of about 40 millimeter of mercury, the hemoglobin saturation of oxygen is around 75%, 70 to 75%. Okay, so this is the area of the curve that is operated by the body most of the time. Right? When oxygenated blood is leaving the lungs, the partial pressure of oxygen in that blood is about 95%. So the percent saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen is about 95 to 97%. Okay, then as this blood travels to the tissues of the body and oxygen is taken up continuously from different cells and tissues of the body, what happens is this partial pressure continues to drop. Okay, and in venous blood, it reaches about 40 millimeter of mercury. Okay, and during this partial pressure of 40 millimeter of mercury, the hemoglobin saturation is 70 to 75%. So it does not drop drastically. Okay, this hemoglobin saturation in normal conditions does not drop rapidly. And only when the partial pressure of oxygen falls below 40 millimeter of mercury, only then this steep portion of the curve comes into play. Okay, then there is rapid fall in the oxygen saturation of hemoglobin. So this is known as oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve, and you also have to know about the volume, how much oxygen is carried by hemoglobin. Okay, so here you can see 20 ml of oxygen is carried per 100 ml of blood when there is 100%, 97 to 100% saturation of hemoglobin by oxygen. Okay, so this is the case when the oxygenated blood is just leaving the lungs. Right, and when this blood again goes to the cells and tissues of the body, and the partial pressure as well as the hemoglobin saturation drops, then when the partial pressure is about 40 millimeter of mercury, the volume of oxygen that is present in the blood is 15 milliliter per 100 ml. So that means the tissues of the body, cells and tissues of the body use up around 5 milliliter of oxygen per 100 ml of blood. And when we're talking about per minute, how much oxygen is being utilized, then we go to the cardiac output. Cardiac output is the amount of blood that is pumped from the heart per minute, right? So it is around 5,000 milliliters. So 5 milliliter is taken up per 100 ml. That is why when we're talking about 5,000 milliliter, then 250 milliliter of blood is being, oxygen is being utilized by the tissues of the body, which is the resting oxygen consumption. Okay, and one more important thing that you have to remember about this curve is the sigmoid shape of this curve. Why is this curve this kind of S-shaped or sigmoid shaped? Why is it not linear? Why does it not go directly from 0 in a straight line to 100? Why is it sigmoid shaped? So this is actually because of this configuration that I was talking about earlier. I talked about tense configuration as well as relaxed configuration, right? So initially, when deoxyhemoglobin is present, that means one molecule of oxygen has not bound to hemoglobin. It is completely deoxygenated. In that case, the globin units are very tightly bound. Okay, and this causes blocks the oxygen binding sites in hemoglobin because of this tight binding. Okay, and as soon as the first oxygen molecule comes and binds, then the globin units are loosened and there is relaxed configuration and more oxygen can come and bind. Okay, so that is why this sigmoid shape is present in this oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. It is not linear because hemoglobin is not just a normal, or it is not a very simple molecule. Okay, it has globin units that are tightly packed when it is not bound to oxygen. Okay, that is why once this globin units are loosened, only then a rapid rise can take place in oxygen saturation. Okay, so that is why there is an initial lag. So now in this case, the oxygen molecules have bound and then there can be a rapid rise due to exposure of the oxygen binding sites in hemoglobin. Okay, so you have to go through the books as well, because I don't think you have heard about this before and it might be a little bit complicated. So this, you have to remember this curve has a characteristic sigmoid shape due to the TR interconversion. That means due to binding of oxygen, conversion from tense configuration to relaxed configuration, and exposure of more binding sites for oxygen. Okay, that is why it has a sigmoid shape. So combination of the first heme in the hemoglobin molecule with oxygen increases the affinity of the second heme, and oxygenation of the second heme increases the affinity of the third, and so on. So the affinity of hemoglobin for the fourth oxygen molecules is many times that of the first. Okay, so this is about oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. So what is the maximum oxygen that can combine with hemoglobin? So this also you have to remember. Okay, so when fully saturated, each talking about gram of normal hemoglobin, it contains 1.39 milliliter of oxygen when fully saturated. Okay, however, the blood contains small amounts of inactive hemoglobin derivatives as well. That is why it comes to be about 1.34 milliliter of oxygen. So 1 gram of hemoglobin, it carries about 1.34 milliliter of oxygen. You just have to memorize, okay? 1 gram of hemoglobin, 1.34 ml of oxygen. Okay, so normally in our body, how much hemoglobin is present? About 15 gram per deciliter. Right, the hemoglobin concentration in normal blood is about 15 gram per deciliter, and 1 deciliter of blood contains 20.1 ml. So we had studied about this, right? How? Because 1.34 into 15 is 20.1 ml. 1 gram of hemoglobin carries 1.34 ml of oxygen, right? We have 15 grams per deciliter of hemoglobin in our body. So 1.34 into 15 is 20.1 ml. Okay, deciliter is nothing but 100 ml. Okay, here in the graph also we are talked about how much this is present in 100 ml of blood. See, here I had mentioned 20 ml, right? It's the same over here. How did we derive from that? Because 1 gram of hemoglobin carries 1.34 milliliter of oxygen. We have 15 grams of hemoglobin in our body per deciliter or per 100 ml. So multiplying 1.34 with 15, we get ml. So this much oxygen is bound to hemoglobin when hemoglobin is 100% saturated. But like I mentioned, there is a slight admixture with venous blood. Okay, due to physiologic shunt, and that is why the arterial blood contains about 19.8 ml of oxygen per 100 ml or per deciliter. Okay, these values you have to memorize. You might be asked in your exam, MCQs, Viva as well. So remember 1.34, then you can reduce to 20.1 because you know the concentration, right? And you have to also remember physiologic shunt or venous admixture. So due to this combination with venous blood, this ml is slightly reduced. So a little bit less oxygen is carried, about 19.8 ml. Okay. Okay, so this is about oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve and its characteristics. Now, another very important question is what are the factors that affect oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve? We talked about and where is the normal operating area of this curve? Okay, we know about that now. Now we have to understand what are the different factors that might affect this curve. Okay, so number one is pH. pH has a great effect on this curve. Next is temperature. Another is a molecule which is known as 2,3-bis-phosphoglycerate, 2,3-DPG. And next is carbon dioxide concentration, which is actually also related to pH. Okay, so these factors, they affect oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. So let us talk about how they affect it. Okay. So first, let's talk about temperature and pH. So rise in temperature or fall in pH shifts this curve to the right. It causes shifting of oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve to right. What does that mean when oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve is shifted to right? Does that mean that higher partial pressure of oxygen is required for hemoglobin to bind, or does it mean lower partial pressure of oxygen is required? So see in this picture, see, this is in the x-axis you have partial pressure of oxygen, in the y-axis you have percent saturation of hemoglobin, right? So when this curve, this is the normal position of the curve, let's say. Now when it moves to the right, what is happening? More partial pressure of oxygen is required for hemoglobin saturation. So oxygen combination with hemoglobin is getting difficult now when the curve is shifted to the right. Oxygen has less tendency to bind with hemoglobin. And hemoglobin has more tendency to release oxygen, not bind with it, when the curve is shifted to right. Conversely, when the curve is shifted to left, what is happening? It means that oxygen is now readily binding to hemoglobin, because even in lesser partial pressure of oxygen, there is more hemoglobin saturation. I hope you understand. And one of the important factor is temperature, another is pH. Okay, so when there is a rise in temperature, there is right shifting of oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. Now what does that mean? It means more oxygen is now being made available to the cells and tissues. Okay, because oxygen has less tendency to bind to hemoglobin, right? That is why it is now in free form and it is going to the cells and the tissues. It is being released from hemoglobin. That is happening at the cells and tissues level of our body. Okay. Now, why is this happening? pH is less or more in the blood that is present near the tissues or in the tissue capillaries. Do you have any idea?
Less pH.
Than the pulmonary. Yes. What would happen? Less pH. Very good. It would have less pH. Why? Because oxygen is continuously being utilized. Carbon dioxide is continuously being produced. Right. So due to this carbon dioxide and formation of carbonic acid, there is presence of more hydrogen ions in the blood that is present near the tissues. Right. So due to this more amount of hydrogen ions, the pH is reduced. Right, and due to this reduction in the pH, it has the effect of shifting the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve to the right. So it is very convenient, right? Because now more oxygen can be released to the tissues. Right, this is happening at the cellular or tissue level in the tissue capillaries. Whereas in case of lungs, the opposite is happening. Why? Because in the pulmonary capillaries near the lungs, what is happening? Oxygen is being taken up, whereas carbon dioxide is diffusing out of the blood into the alveolus. So carbon dioxide is less in concentration, right? Due to that, there is less carbonic acid being formed, less hydrogen ions being formed, and that is why there is more pH. So when there is more pH, oxygen has more tendency to bind to hemoglobin. Okay, so in the lungs, in the pulmonary capillary level, what is happening is more and more oxygen is binding to hemoglobin. In case of cellular and tissue level, more and more oxygen is being released from hemoglobin. Okay, this is known as Bohr effect. Okay, so I'm going to talk about that as well. And talking about temperature also, when there is increase in temperature, there is rightward shifting of the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. So it is shifting to the right and more oxygen is being made available to the tissues. Again, very convenient because metabolic processes are continuously taking place at the tissue level, cell level. Okay, the temperature is increased there and there is facilitation of more release of oxygen from hemoglobin. Okay, so these are the two important factors. And like I said, it is known as Bohr effect. Bohr effect is not all of it. Okay, I'm just talking about the hydrogen ions and pH when I'm talking about Bohr effect. So the shift of oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve to the right in response to increase in the blood carbon dioxide and hydrogen ions. That means a decrease in pH. This has a significant effect by enhancing the release of oxygen from blood to the tissues and enhancing the oxygenation of blood in the lungs. So like I mentioned, like I already explained to you, so this is known as Bohr effect. Don't forget this, okay? This is very common question in your exam. Bohr effect means shift of oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve to the right due to decrease in pH or increase in hydrogen ions. Okay, and it has a significant effect by enhancing the release of oxygen from blood to tissues. This is Bohr effect. And this I've already explained to you. As the blood passes through the tissues, carbon dioxide diffuses from tissue cells into the blood. Why? Because metabolic activities are taking place in the cell. Oxygen is continuously utilized. Carbon dioxide is released. Right, and when carbon dioxide is released, it increases blood partial pressure of carbon dioxide. It also increases the carbonic acid in the blood. Okay, and this dissociation of the carbonic acid, as you know, would lead in increase in the hydrogen ion concentration. Increase in hydrogen ion concentration means decrease in pH. Okay, so this shifts the this oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve to right, forcing oxygen away from hemoglobin and providing oxygen to tissues. Okay, so this is about Bohr effect, and like I already mentioned, the opposite effect occurs in the lungs. Why? Because carbon dioxide is now diffusing from the blood into the alveolus, right? So there is a decrease in hydrogen ion concentration and there is a left shifting of oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. Okay. Now, I also talked about one molecule which is known as 2,3-bis-phosphoglycerate or 2,3-diphosphoglycerate, which is very plentiful in red cells, okay, RBC. Why? Because it is a product of glycolysis. Okay, and this 2,3-BPG has a great affinity to deoxyhemoglobin. It binds to the beta chains of deoxyhemoglobin. So like I mentioned, usually there are 4 chains. So in adult hemoglobin, there are alpha chains and there are beta chains. Okay, and this 2,3-BPG, it binds to beta chains of deoxyhemoglobin. So one molecule of deoxyhemoglobin binds one molecule of 2,3-BPG. The reaction looks something like this. See, HbO2 plus 2,3-BPG, it displaces oxygen and binds to hemoglobin. So since it displaces this oxygen from hemoglobin, what happens is there is rightward shift of oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. Right? It shifts this oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve to right. Why? Because it is releasing oxygen from hemoglobin. Okay, so more partial pressure of oxygen is required for saturation of hemoglobin. Okay, so this is again important factor for shifting the curve to the right. So just remember, you cannot forget pH, okay, temperature and 2,3-BPG. These are most important factors that shift this curve to right. Okay, and another is exercise. So exercise has an indirect effect. This also shifts the curve to the right. Why? Because large amount of metabolism is taking place in exercising muscles. Again, large quantities of carbon dioxide are being released. Okay, there are also some other factors that are being released that increase the hydrogen ion concentration in the muscle capillary blood. Okay, and this causes decrease in pH, like I said, causes this curve to shift to right. Again, the temperature of the exercising muscle is also high. So again, increase in temperature, it shifts the curve to the right. So exercise also has an indirect effect. Okay, so what did we talk about? We talked about pH, we talked about temperature, we talked about 2,3-BPG, and also indirect effect of exercise. So these all things, they shift the curve to the right. Okay. Now, there are also some factors that cause shifting of this curve to the left. Okay, one of them is carbon monoxide. Another is fetal hemoglobin, myoglobin, and decrease in body temperature. This decrease in body temperature is obvious. You know the effect of temperature, right? Now, talking about carbon monoxide, so why does it shift this curve to the left? This is because it has a very great affinity to hemoglobin. It has a great tendency to bind with hemoglobin. Okay, even more than oxygen, many folds more than oxygen actually. So if there is more carbon monoxide in your blood, then this carbon monoxide goes and immediately binds to hemoglobin, and it does not allow oxygen to bind. Okay, and this also shifts the curve to the left because of inhibition of synthesis of 2,3-BPG. Carbon monoxide, it actually inhibits the synthesis of 2,3-BPG, and 2,3-BPG, as you know, shifts the curve to the right. Okay, so that's why large quantities of hemoglobin, it is in the form of carboxyhemoglobin in case of carbon monoxide poisoning or something like that. Okay, so this causes shift of the curve to left. Then also there is fetal hemoglobin. In case of fetal hemoglobin, there is different kind of chains. Okay, so I mentioned in adult hemoglobin, there was beta chain, alpha chain, right? But in case of fetal hemoglobin, there is a gamma chain. And 2,3-BPG has poor binding to gamma chain. It binds to beta chain, if you remember, right? And fetal hemoglobin has gamma polypeptide chain. So 2,3-BPG does not easily bind to fetal hemoglobin. So this causes shift of the ODC to left, oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve to left. Okay. However, the fetus does not suffer from hypoxia because of this. Okay, because it has less metabolic activities and it requires less oxygen than adults. Yes, so this shifts the curve to left. Again, myoglobin, there's a protein which is known as myoglobin that is present in muscles. So myo relates to muscles, right? So there is a protein known as myoglobin present in the muscle. but it only contains one iron. Okay, it stores oxygen intramuscularly. It contains only one iron atom, but it takes up oxygen at low pressure, okay, much readily than hemoglobin. So oxygen associates with myoglobin very fast. So this also shifts the curve to left. Okay, so there is a physiological significance as well to this oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. Okay, so like I said, the top portion of the curve is the one which is operated in the normal body usually. Okay, and the percentage saturation of hemoglobin only falls from about 97 to 92%. Okay, even if partial pressure drops to 70 millimeter of mercury. Okay, and the volume of oxygen that is carried also does not drop significantly. That is why in normal altitudes, the subjects suffer only a little impairment in their oxygen uptake, okay, even when the partial pressure greatly drops. So there is a safety factor, okay? So even when partial pressure of oxygen is decreasing in your blood, even then what happens? Even then the percentage saturation does not fall very significantly, okay? So oxygen is continuously transported efficiently in the body, even when there is a fall in partial pressure of oxygen. Okay, so there's also a significance of steep part, okay? So like I said, when the partial pressure of oxygen falls below 40 millimeter of mercury, the curve becomes steeper. Right, and when this curve becomes steeper, there is more release of oxygen from hemoglobin to prevent tissues suffering from hypoxia. Okay, so I think we have time is up, and I hope all of you go through the slides. I'm going to upload another slide which has more notes, even more notes than this slide, and you have to go through it. Complicated class, I think, because you haven't studied this before, so you have to go back and study it. Okay, right, so I think we're going to conclude here. If you have questions, you can ask me in chat, okay? And don't forget about the homework that I've given you. You have to find those answers out and you have to submit them by Tuesday, because that is one of the most important questions asked to you in your Viva. Let me download your attendance first. Okay, thank you everyone. If you have doubts, you can message me, okay? And go back and study.